Here we go. There we go. Hello, and welcome to this week's installation of our TLI webinar meeting session. Today's session is I found my exam on Chegg. So what's next? 7 strategies for selecting alternative assessment methods. And we are joined today by Diana Lenko, who teaches in the MBA program as part or in connection with the Martin, the Business School of Business and Economics, something like that. It's MBS. It's a whole long slew of a name. Anyway, she's going to be sharing strategies for selecting alternative assessment methods. Because this is a meeting, you have the option to either have your camera on or off. And Diana also welcomes you to ask your questions throughout the session. You don't feel like you have to wait till the end. We also have chat available if you'd like to put anything there, and even reactions. So if you have updated to the newest version, you'll see an extended option and an assortment of them. And if not, you'll still have that usual line of those 5 or 6 different options. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Diana, and let's get the fun started.
Thank you, Christy. Thank you for this warm introduction. Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Diana Lenko, faculty member in the business school. Yes, I teach in the MBA program. And I am here today because some of my vivid memories that stayed with me from my graduate studies came from memorable assignments. I remember the competition, the drive, time and effort I put into them when these assignments were different, engaging, unusual, creative. So as an educator, I want to recreate this feeling for my students. Ironically, this outside the box approach is what can maybe, and just maybe, help us defeat another super spreader. So today I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about Chegg. So we are here to discuss solutions, right? And Chegg is not the only one. There are many others. However, I emphasize Chegg because it's quickly becoming a verb, just like Google. So I have to tell you, educators' life seemed less complicated before the pandemic and this whole virtual teaching. I graduated just 5 years ago, but I remember using Scantrons, and it was not that uncommon in all face-to-face classes to use examination books just like this one. And right here on the front page, you see a statement about academic honesty. And look, I was not a perfect student. I did not always pay attention. Now that I am on the other side, I read it. I finally read the full statement, and one sentence stood out to me and really summed it all up, and I want to read it to you. Cheating undermines the educational process, and it can ruin both a university's reputation and the value of the degrees it offers. So I am someone who graduated from Cal State system. I believe that we provide excellent value to the community and have to do all we can to uphold our reputation. And Chegging is now a thing. Ask any student, they will know exactly what it means. At I believe it's $14.95 or roughly a price of Netflix subscription. It takes seconds to look up answers in Czech's database of 46 million textbook and exam problems and turn them as your own. In other words, to cheat, right? So no wonder that Czech it already happened, the most valuable edtech company in America. And just since the pandemic, its stock has tripled. Czech is now a company valued at over $12 billion. So I'm giving you these fun facts because honestly, some faculty don't realize the scope and the speed of these educational market transformations and what is happening. And if you find yourself in this position, first of all, don't blame yourself. I was completely clueless just a few months last semester as I was discovering what is happening. I was completely clueless. So a little bit, just a few more facts. Company's headquarters is in Santa Clara, California, but the heart of its operations is in India with 70,000 experts in math, science, technology, engineering degrees, all available 24/7. And sometimes I think average response time is 46 minutes, but sometimes you get answers in 15 minutes. Yes, I'm looking at the chat. It's absolutely crazy. Of course, Czech is offering other services like tutoring or improving writing skills, but the main revenue driver is supplying step-by-step instructions or answers to questions posted by subscribers. So it's a subscription-based model, just like Netflix, $14.95, and they are. Yes, so let's talk about the CEO and to understand a little bit what's driving this. I want to say success, but success is very subjective in this case, right? This growth. So to understand what's driving, Dan Rosenwijk, CEO of the company, I read his 2017 interview, so it happened before all these transformations. I recall him saying, well, you live in Silicon Valley and everybody around you is a billionaire and you are not, and every company goes public, and at least they have at least one moment where the stock goes up and yours doesn't. And he recalls tough times the company was going through, and I have to give it to them, they almost did not make it. Their stock tanked at one point. They have been through all kind of ups and downs. And again, he was saying in his interview how devastating it was. And he found himself, because everyone is a billionaire and he is not, stock, everyone else is successful, lying in bed, sucking his thumb, how devastating it was, right? So not to worry, he is now doing okay and profited tremendously from this company growth. And the leadership, if you listen to leadership of the company of Czech, they will tell you straight up, they will say Higher education needs to adjust to on-demand economy, to this whole notion of gig economy, just like Uber and Amazon. Looking at the chat, yes. Yeah, they also offer tutoring, but again, the driver, the main revenue driver is providing answers to questions posted by subscribers. And the problem with this idea that let's disrupt higher education and be just like Uber and Amazon, this model is cashing on students' worst instincts and temptations, right? Okay, don't get me wrong, it's unreasonable to lay the blame on solely on Czech, of course. Students have always cheated. In the 12th century, Chinese test takers, they sold Confucian texts into their clothes so they could consult them, refer to them during their civil service exams. You see such example on your screen. So it's a human nature. And we know that stress, pressure, anxiety are some of the drivers of cheating, and we all experienced them last year. The difference is that pandemic accelerated and magnified all these trends, especially when studying from home makes it so much harder to get caught. And you know what? Sometimes no one has set clear expectations. What would happen if students take 3 classes, 4 classes, 5 classes while working full time? I find that students believe online education is easier. So they take all kind of shortcuts when they find themselves into this situation, when they have to work to pay for school and support families. Sometimes there are these conversations that explain really what plagiarism is, what cheating is. They are lacking when they are just entering higher education. And if we are completely frank, sometimes they don't care about the topic, but have to take it, or they don't care about the class delivery. Yes, it's setting up expectations from the beginning. Okay, so let me ask you this question. And Christy, would you be so kind to launch our poll? It's anonymous. I hope you can see a poll questions. And what I'm asking you essentially is, have you Googled your exams? Okay, so, you know, I have to say we have very savvy faculty members on this call, right? People who, oh, I am scared to find out. This is very interesting. So thank you for participating. I'm showing you results. So yeah, so we have people on this call who have been sounding the alarm, but yeah, faculty is either unaware or believe that my students never cheat, or that my materials are new, therefore they are secure with me and with the publisher. So my message to you, don't underestimate cheating, and don't think that when we return on campus in the fall, the problems will magically disappear. And of course, the first strategy is to address this head on. Take a look at some of the steps to take with each of the websites. We will make these resources available to you. However, I feel that it is a David and Goliath battle at this point. If you are spending your time attempting to battle CHEK, forgive me, it's a very strong statement. You are probably going to lose. Looking at the chat, thank you, Christy. Yes, we will make these resources available to you. So instead of this David and Goliath battle with CHEK, let's see what else we can be doing, because it's also how you design your tests and assignments, right? So let's dive into it. And full disclosure, every strategy that I mentioned is what I have tested and implemented myself, right? So there were many failures. Some of what I thought was very innovative or so creative, I am so great, completely fell on its face. But I want to talk to you about what worked. So I was one of those naive instructors who didn't think that you would find publishers, banks on CHEK, which in theory should be only available to registered educators. And I am happy to use some of the publishers' questions because we know how difficult and time-consuming it can be to produce high-quality multiple choice or true-false questions. Much to my surprise, it was all available online. So I decided to still use them, but as a self-check knowledge. As a result, they are ungraded, untimed, and not mandatory. And I emphasized to students from the beginning that I would be looking only at aggregate results and going over the questions in class, which majority did not get right. So this was a risky strategy. I was not sure what to expect. I thought no one would do it. And guess what? Now that the pressure is gone, they know that they can fail. 70% of the class participates. And this is my, not sure if you can see it. This is how I keep track. I know a very old school of these quizzes participation. So 70% of the class does participate. And it also has been confirmed by research, and I have links available to you at the end of this presentation. A very recent meta-analysis suggests that students who struggle will most benefit from weekly practice quizzes, right? And some of our faculty members are very creative. They are using statistical R programming language to write their tests. But you know what? You don't have to know statistical languages. And if you have to use those question banks, another tip for you, modify the questions, for example, by flipping their meaning from true to false and vice versa. So let me show it to you. So I have a publisher's question from the publisher, and in one case, it's the first example, it's the original question talking about quality processes and the shift from a product to process, which is true. So what I did, I flipped the question, and now it's a false question, right? So now it's a shift from process to product, which is false. So the chances are, if students are looking it up, they find it, they will take the suggested answer from check, but they will be incorrect. Okay, so you can also create groups of questions and tell Canvas to pick just one or a few questions randomly. So at least you can reduce the chances of students' collaboration. So let me show it to you. Let me go to my sandbox. So you are in quizzes. You create just a classic quiz. You set it up. You go to questions, but now instead of adding a new question, you add a new group question. And you go to the banks, and let's say for the final, I have 7 questions, and I am telling Canvas to pick just 2 questions, 10 points per question, and I create my group. So now Canvas will pick only 2 questions out of 7 randomly for each individual student. So advice is develop a large question pool and deliver questions and answers randomly. Let me go back to the presentation. So don't shy away from popular tools like Kahoot to create online quizzes that are not just fun, but also can help students retain the material better. And if you really want to take it up a notch, you can create a Jeopardy board to gamify your quizzes. Okay, I mentioned that one of my most memorable experiences in the MBA program when I was a student was a marketing online competition, a game. So this semester, I decided to conduct a business simulation instead of a final. And if you have limited experience with online teaching or with using simulations, I understand that this idea can be quite daunting. A popular misconception, they are expensive, difficult to set up. So in my case, I chose a simulation from Harvard. It costs $15 per student, which I believe is reasonable for MBA students. And you get additional discounts as you add supplemental readings, but you don't have to. And it takes very little time to set up your course package at a Harvard Business Publishing. You send a link to students, they pay directly to the publisher. So let me pause a presentation and show you what I'm talking about. So I am at Harvard Business Publishing website, and if I type simulation, I instantaneously get a lot of results. So you can select a topic which is relevant to you. Setting the course is a very straightforward process. Looking at the chat. Okay, so good question, Maria. Did I get any pushback because it was not free, right? They had to spend money. They were cautiously optimistic. I didn't get, again, for MBA students, it's a little bit different, but so far I see a lot of engagement, discussions, questions, aha moments. response has been very positive. Let me give you example, aha moments that speak directly to the learning objectives in the course. Oh, this is why you told us that forecasting in supply chain is important. Aha, this is why we need to build cross-functional teams, because we will need to get approval of the board. So this is just easy and natural way for students to apply their course knowledge. And again, I believe it's all, you used it as okay, so let me, yes, so $15 is what you would pay to check, Megan. Very good, very good point. However, I again, it was one of my most memorable experiences. To me, it immediately shows you, how to apply the knowledge, why we are in this class. It's easy to set up. Of course, important consideration is the choice between team-based or single player. You may find that single player is easier to manage. A lot of schools approach it like competition between students. I recommend not to overemphasize competitive elements of the game and their final ranking or standing in the game as the basis for the grades. For example, I give them 4 tries to complete it, seek feedback, learn from mistakes, and improve their own results, and then count the highest results. So essentially, it's a competition with yourself. And what it does, it alleviates some of the anxiety when you are competing with your peers. And it's less temptation to get help on a side. The downside, of course, it's more consuming for you as instructor. You have to monitor, you have to answer questions. The final debrief is absolutely critical, but I truly believe that it can enrich your educational course. Again, I implemented it instead of the final exam, so they were very happy about this. Let me go back to the presentation. Okay, next, I have to tell you about an unusual type of test called two-stage exam. So two-stage exams sometimes go by names like pyramid exam or collaborative testing, but whatever the name is, it means that students essentially take the same exam twice in a row. So now there are many skeptics, right? Especially in online environment. How does it work? Oh my God, it's another time-consuming endeavor. So during, let me tell you briefly how it works. So during the first stage, students are taking individual tests directly in Canvas on a specified date and time, so synchronously for an hour and a half. In my case, it was a quantitative problem. I wrote the case based on a real life situation. So there is a quantitative component to it and a lot of market environmental factors. And I hear you, 15 minutes, India, outsource. But the trick is, once you complete the math portion of the exam, even if you outsource it and get help, you arrive exactly to the threshold where it doesn't help you. Now you have to make a decision based on everything we learned in the class, based on everything we talked about and discussed before. Looking at the chat, it's hiding from me. Megan, thank you so much. Megan is giving us some additional resource for two-stage exam. So, okay, so this is stage number one. Stage number two, now in teams, they have 2 days to retake the same test at their own convenience. So in effect, retaking the test asynchronously. So number one, it reinforces the idea of how decisions are made. I teach a supply chain management class. So this is how decisions are made in real supply chains by collaboration, right? Cross-departmental team arriving to a consensus. Secondly, research shows that students do better when they bounce ideas off of each other, brainstorm solutions, and they are no longer under pressure. So it's about quality of their feedback that they receive from each other. And, you know, there is also added element of excitement when they come to some sort of consensus. And they are less likely to outsource the collaboration process, right? Students agree to honor pledge, and in group setting, peers serve as potential witnesses to discourage any bad behavior. Next strategy, use short reflection essay style questions that align with learning goals in each unit, week, module, real life applications which students may find at work, or think about situational questions they may get during an interview process when they apply for their dream job after graduation. So looking at the chat, oh, Maria, so Maria, you're asking about a two-stage exams. So I give a higher weight to individual component, let's say 60% and 40% to the team collaboration. And I also tell them that if by any chance, again, research and my experience shows that they do better in teams, but if by any chance they do poorly now on at a second stage, the second stage grade cannot be lower than the grade for their individual performance. So groups are, I use the same groups. They do team project, and so they already know each other, and I'm utilizing the same groups that are self-formed in the beginning of the semester. Okay, so going back to the pop-up quizzes, and again, short reflections. Let me give you a specific example. So last week, we had a team that presented on use of technology in supply chain. So for 1 hour, we discussed advantages, different types of technologies, what fits which company size. So this Saturday, I'm going to ask them a pop-up question. It's a very short 15 minutes reflection question. And, you know, wait, no spies. We don't have any spies on this call, right? So my question this Saturday will be, okay, you are now hired as supply chain manager at Box Brothers, small company in Woodland Hills. And the company's founder just called you in, and she's very unhappy because she's asking you, you are proposing to develop the supply management system, and we have limited resources. Don't you know that we are in the middle of pandemic? So how do you convince her? What do you tell her? And this is, by the way, such a classic example from a behavioral interview process. Also important, if students emphasize with a protagonist in your situation, in your business case, can connect to her personal circumstances, they will respond more positively to the story, to the question, to the reflection, and more likely to engage in class discussion. Harvard recently published a very interesting article, and they talk about business cases. So this business case was about an entrepreneur who started making masks during a pandemic. Very popular case. So rather than talking about some hypothetical and some superhuman in your cases, right? So you can set these reflection questions as pop-up quizzes and schedule them throughout the semester. And this is what I did. Yes, and we need more cases with, of course, females, underrepresented communities. It's also important. So thank you so much for this note. And of course, use of please don't shy away from using plagiarism software. Some of it is already embedded in Canvas. So you create your assignments in 5 minutes, right? And yes, it's not perfect. You have to be aware that there are ways to cheat. Turn it in. One trick is to replace a common character with a different character that looks just like this or similar. You see it on your screen. Another example is using E from Cyrillic. So E in Cyrillic is the same as E in Latin alphabet. Okay, so bottom line, go into the weeds, review similarity reports, regardless of the percentages. Don't just look at percentages and that show in the similarity score. It is, the best practice is to ensure that you understand what's going on, open the paper, take a look, and understand that if there are red flags, you have to look more closely. So but what's even more, and turn it in, by the way, you see it on my screen. I apologize, it's a bit busy slide, but they have wonderful resources explaining to students what is plagiarism, right? And by the way, you can see that contract cheating, ghost writing, checking is on the spectrum as really most serious offense. But to me, what's even more important than using this plagiarism detecting software is knowing each student's voice, right? I encourage you to get to know their writing style in weekly assignments. Even if your class is face-to-face, don't discount those discussion posts in Canvas, because this is how you get to know their writing style. So when I grade papers, I can often not always, but sometimes detect plagiarized text because it just doesn't sound like the student's, usual voice, right? And finally, mix it up. Don't just rely on tests, exams, multiple choice, true or false questions. Let me tell you, anxiety struggle with timed tests, with exams is real. Some students know course material inside and out. Others don't perform well on tests for reasons related to their cultural backgrounds, home environment. What do I mean by cultural background? Let me give you example from my life. I come from an educational system where I had no idea about this whole concept of timed exams. During my undergraduate studies, in another country, I did not know about this whole notion of timed exams. You also have a home environment, different access to reliable internet service, computers, and many other factors. So mix it up. If some of the techniques that I mentioned today may seem daunting, very time consuming, give students, you still have options, give students a variety of ways to show their learning, get creative, get something that, come up with something that cannot be outsourced to Czech and all those 70,000 freelancers. Create a brief video about the stake of some current events in the industry, for example, or ask them to interview professionals in their desired career, introduce them to some qualitative analysis, for example, if your class is highly qualitative, right? So adding other forms of assessment allows students who struggle with test anxiety to show that they are learning in other ways, right? Instead of seeking help from outside, this is when they start seeking help from outside. So in conclusion, I want to say that certainly cheating can be reduced by many of the actions we discussed today. And the key word is reduce, not eliminate. Of course, I forgot to mention honors pledge. So try this. However, I have to tell you that there are some very mixed findings on the effect of honor pledge, honor code. Yes, creative, engaging, interesting assignments is not a panacea that eliminates cheating, but I sincerely hope that these suggestions can help you improve your instruction. And lastly, I want to express my sincere gratitude and thanks to Channel Islands Teaching and Learning Innovations team for this wonderful opportunity. So many tricks and tips and lessons I learned from them. And of course, my colleagues from the business school and the Teaching Tuesday group, who helped me become a better teacher. And what you see on your screen, this is my last outing before the pandemic started. This is a wonderful Renoir painting that I saw in Philip's Museum in Washington, D.C. Right before we went on a shutdown. So this is exactly how I want to reopen and spend my time as soon as we are able to. Okay, so looking at the chat, a few additional resources. Thank you so much, Megan. You can see works cited, and this is a funny slide. I was debating whether to include it or not. I call it the Mickey Mouse technique. So but very effective, very simple but very effective. Some faculty, they mention a secret word, secret password during their lectures, and then incorporate it into questions or exams. Okay, let me stop sharing and see if you have any questions, any comments, anything, any aha moments.
Any of you are invited to turn your mics on if you'd like to share anything. Don't feel you have you're text bound. I'm just glad that we have a group today. And yeah, we have a few minutes remaining.
So I do have a question. With the ghostwriter or the real-time answers to questions, it almost seems like there's no real solution to that, right? I mean, even if you have a fully original, and this is what Maria was mentioning in another meeting, even if you create something completely original, if the student is asking for help real time, and these services are 24/7, I just learned. So even if you'd said, this is going to open up in the middle of the night and you're going to be submitting early in the morning, students still have access to asking other people to do their work.
Well, another technique, thank you for this question. Another technique is to create a grading matrix that is linked directly to your class and your learning objectives, right? So that all those 70,000 freelancers have no idea. They don't know what you discussed before, right? So in tight, align it with learning objectives, the module for this particular week, everything we discussed before. Go back. To me, this is the only, again, this quantitative problem, and it's quantitative class, right? So they can outsource it like this, but then they calculate and they arrive to a situation, oh, wait a second, doesn't help me. Now I have to think about what we discussed. How do you choose between domestic local supplier or international supplier? What do I do? So ghost writers, they will not know what we discussed, right? And also, if you break it down into manageable pieces, weekly, short reflection questions, the cost will add up. If they keep using those ghost writers, outsource, imagine how miserable your life becomes eventually. It's time consuming, it's all this money, it's almost like it's easier to just do it yourself.
I hope, yeah, I hope the students also definitely see it that way, and breaking up into smaller chunks hopefully brings down the cost to the students, right? To actually write something at the end of the semester that's going to be a few pages, or I don't know, however long the report is. That's a very good point as well. Thank you, Diana.
Writing a comment related to Aiken question, which I think is a very valid one, and I'm on the pessimistic side because I put a lot of thinking about this, and one thing I figured out, well, if I compare the writing, right, if I have low stake assignments at the beginning and I get to see the writing of the students, then by the time there is a serious summative assessment where they might be willing to spend money, I'm going to notice a difference. And I actually had the experience with one student this semester where the first writing was so-so, and then out of the blue, all the case analysis became really Good. And this is being recorded, so I don't want to give more details. But again, you might be using a ghostwriter for all your exams, right? All your case analysis or every homework that we ask. So one thing I was trying to figure out makes sense in the final exam is going to be a case analysis, open everything, right? That for me is critical. If we keep just asking them to memorize things, that's why we are encourage them maybe to cheat. But if it's open everything, there is no reason to be stressed about not remembering things, but how you apply those things. But I was thinking maybe I can have a 5-minute checkpoint where I say, okay, great, you wrote your analysis, let's discuss this specific point, and see if the student is able to articulate what she or he wrote. Or maybe some random questions from the multiple choice, the short questions. But at least there is that face-to-face interaction online. I just don't know how we can guarantee, especially in our online program. Everything is asynchronous. You don't have to get to see the students. At least they come to office hours. They just submit work. They test online. So there is not a way. You could just having your best friend taking the whole MBA online, right? Diana, we've been talking about MBA online now being offered by top universities for $25,000. Well, you can have your friend doing it for you and you'll get an MBA diploma at the end. And I'm not saying people are driven by just the diploma, but under stress circumstances, we might take decisions that are not the most appropriate for our own learning. So I'm a little bit pessimistic.
And Maria, that's a really good point. Again, in the previous meeting, they actually showed a video where people said openly that they were taking full classes, putting themselves as if they are different people because we don't require cameras, right? Or maybe you didn't meet the student previously, so you think that that is the student that's taking the actual class. So it seems like it's much more common than I envisioned it would be, because I didn't think people would want to take a full class without getting the credit for it, but apparently I'm wrong.
Yeah. Christy, can you put this on pause for a second?
Well, okay. So yeah, we are at the top of the hour. We again, we will not find a solution right now to this problem, but all we can do is be aware and strive to reduce the chances of plagiarism in our.
Take a quick moment to thank you for joining us today, and also thank Diana for leading this great session. I hope you all took at least one thing away, whether good or bad. Again, it's subjective, but as I mentioned in the chat, there's a plethora of other resources that were shared by those that were in attendance. So I will also be sure to include those when I do finally get this recording up on our knowledge base site so that everyone can access everything. And with that, I'm going to say that we are done, and I'm going to turn the recording off, and everyone have a great day. Thank you.